Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome InfraPioneer show. Today's guest, we have Frederico Ramos, or Fred. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming me, for inviting me. It's a pleasure. As we were just discussing, this has been in line for a long time, but with all these episodes that we happened, it's only materializing now, but I'm looking forward to it. It is an honor. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Could you tell for our audience a little more about yourself and your backgrounds? And you have done like a lot of stuff and a lot of different things, and I think that's something.
Yeah, I think it's also the advantage of not being so young, as you can see here, right? It's well, I'm an architect. I have a second degree in environmental planning also, and I have now 26 years of experience. So that's why I say it's the advantage of having some career. And I've worked in Europe, and I've worked in Asia, and for a while I've worked in Australia. So I've worked in Portugal, Hong Kong, Singapore, Macau, and Melbourne, effectively. Sometimes people ask me if I'm an expert in digitalization. I don't like to call myself an expert, just to respect of the experts that I've worked with. So I say that I'm an enthusiast. That is different. But I'm really passionate about architecture, and digitalization is now part of the world of the architecture and the AEC construction industry. So being passionate about that is normal that I'm passionate about also digitalization.
Yeah, I think the architecture and civil engineering has taken like big leaps from the CAD world to this more algorithmic based design and modeling.
Yes, you're right. When I started, we were still doing pre-CAD. So through all my university and even for my 2 or 3 first positions, we were doing just normal pens, rulers, drawing tables. So it has been an interesting ride to change. So that's why I'm not so concerned about. A lot of times people are afraid of the digitalization, and I say, well, it's a tool. When I started, we were using pens. Now we use computers. Maybe in the future we'll have a chip implant in our brain. Who knows?
Great. Out of curiosity, how did you initially get into the architecture industry?
Actually, it's curious because the year that I applied for university, it was a special year in my country. There were some discussions, and as a result, the results for entrance to the university were delayed. And in the meantime, the private university that I had also applied came out. So I ended up entering in the public university in marketing and in the private university in architecture. But because I was already doing that for a couple of months, because the official university started like, I guess it was 3 or 4 months later, due to that confusion of regulations and all of these things. And I was enjoying so much architecture, I say, no, I'm not going to marketing, I'll just stay here. So if it had gone the other way, maybe today I will be, I don't know, very rich and having a marketing agency, because they seem to have much more money than architects anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like when I was younger, I worked for a couple of marketing companies, and yeah, I could agree that it's more of clients' money, but yeah, a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's like, but I think it's also because when you only work in the construction industry, it takes a long time for clients to see the benefit of what you are doing.
For sure.
And when you work in marketing, is like you prepare something, 1 month later, or sometimes even less, you have an advertising out, so you immediately start to see return. So it's very easy to connect the work with what you are doing. But sorry, we digress. That's me.
By the way, out of curiosity, like I'm totally on the like construction side, so I'm not so much well aware of how architecture processes happen. So just to little open up, how long does the architecture work itself take time before it goes to the civil engineer to make construction planning?
That's an interesting one, because I think one of the misconceptions that we have also that is common to hear about in the industry is the roles of the architects and engineers and contractors. I myself believe that they are much more integrated than what we have seen in the latest decades or so. They started to be more siloed approach. But if you look historically, like in the times that we were building cathedrals, masonry masters were architects and were builders, and everybody was actually the same, right? So it was much more integrated. And it's just on recent times that things started to split. And I actually believe that's one of the challenges that we are facing now, is that we need to get back to be more collaborative. It's like architects are not only people that do drawings. We are theoretically, we are trying to create projects of something that is going to be built, right? So if you ask me, I don't believe in a split between the architects do their job, then someone else goes and pick it up and put it to construction. An architect should be on the process since the beginning until the end of the construction. I would even say that if you really want to do a good job, you should even monitor the building during operation so that you can actually learn from the results of the construction. So it's a tricky one. You can say it's very quickly in the sense that you do it in a couple of months and then you are off, or you actually through all the so you start before, you stay through all the construction process, and then we even stay after when construction is over, working with the facility management to actually see how the building is being utilized.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think it's like maybe 5 or 10 years or even more, like this kind of like waterfall process of like architecture and then civil engineering, then construction, then maintenance. I think that has built that like a lot of like misinformation, or people are just not getting something that they really need for to make best quality out of possible for the project. And now, for example, in Finland, we have this has become more and more popular, this kind of design and build projects, where there is the architecture and then there's the civil engineers and construction company, and they are all collaborating together with the design phase to really get those everyone's opinions and details on those plans, and then during the construction, the architects and civil engineers are also with them, supporting and adding details when needed to. Because at least on my line of work, I have seen that usually the vision of architects or then civil engineers doesn't go to the construction companies. We get the DVGs files and we are looking at them and trying to understand what the designer has planned here, but then again, it's just very limited format of how we should build it. So we have quite a lot of this kind of like, well, it's probably this way. This sounds so smarter. Like, I mean, it's really hard to put all the information, but then when you have the designer with you during construction, you can just call, how did you plan this? What was your thoughts about it? And then we can build it much better.
I actually had the benefit, both when I was in Europe and then when I was in Macau. I worked on site also. So for me, it's a much hands-on job. And I always find that it's much more rewarding, the work, when you actually work collaborative in a team. But that's my personal view. I think actually one of the challenges that we will face moving forward is because as we move to digitalization, we will get more collaborative process because the nature of BIM and real-time collaboration 24/7 force you to actually integrate your design and expose it much more to your design team.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why I personally think that uh, it's a bit everything that is happening now is taking us to a position where we integrate much more. So that's where the experience of being on site is much useful. The experience of working with a contractor is much useful because imagine one thing. I want to build a determined project and I want to achieve a final result. A lot of times, um, it's much more efficient if we can discuss with the contractor from the beginning how to build it, because contractors might have very good ideas on how to build something that actually is achieving the same goals that we are trying to pursue in a more effective way. This should not be about defining the construction process, but working together so that you can actually achieve a better construction process. One of the things that concerns me in the industry is I love the fact that the AEC industry, in a way, is building up the built framework for a better society, right? That's what we like to think. When we went to
Yeah.
university and all of this, it was, oh, we are uh, designing the built environment for a better society, right? Then we get to reality and we think that sometimes there's a little bit more complex than that because uh, all the issues of economic constraints, social constraints, sometimes do not allow you only to be so idealistic, but you are still trying to build something. But in the other side, right, is this idea that you sometimes architects are seen as artists, right? And I don't say that there's not an artistic component on that, on our job, but it's very technical and it should be integrated with contractors from the beginning. That's what I think, because I don't see it as a pursuit of a goal of one individual. I see it as something that is actually trying to work together for a better society, with all the challenges that we have in having that goal together with the reality of the world that I know sometimes is a bit challenging. But that's what makes it fun, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think it's really interesting to see now when the more like BIM or digital tools are developing to really get this communication part of this whole project, or even the like from architecture to well, from start of the design to maintenance phase, and really to see the big potential, because I think it's everyone has a lot of different professionals, so they all have different processes, and then trying to put all together, it's quite amazing. Like I mean, even for now, it's amazing to see for each phase working really efficiently and effectively, and like the quality is really good. But then like when we put all this together, like design and build projects, and it's really funny to see like how we can fit all these different groups effectively.
Yeah, actually, I personally like a lot the projects that are design and build. I have a couple, in my experience, I've worked in a couple of projects that are design and build. And I find them to tend to be more, if the team is working collaborative, let's say like that, it's much more probably effective in terms of one of my biggest passions. As I said on the beginning, I'm an architect, but also with a second degree in environmental planning. And one thing that sometimes actually create this almost a conflict, not really a conflict, but is this idea that if you are just building new constructions throughout, right, and just expanding the, as people like to call it, the concrete jungle, right? In a way, you are not really working towards leaving a better planet to the generations to come, right? In that sense. So it's a bit tricky when we see construction industry being associated as such a negative impact to the environment. We know that not only during the construction process, the waste is huge. Sometimes even during the operation of the buildings, the AC industry is responsible for a big chunk of environmental footprint, right? It's a carbon footprint associated with buildings operation is enormous. And that's why I believe that anything that we can do with design and build usually is a bit more effective. But anything that you can go beyond that and actually work in digital construction. I like to talk about this idea of, I'm sure that you heard the term before. People talk virtual design and construction. I like to call it with one more aspect, that virtual design, construction, and operation. Because it's only when you look at the full cycle of the life cycle of the building that you can really appreciate the impact that you have to the environment from the actions that you are putting in. And this is only achievable when you go beyond just the simple design plus build, or even design and build, but you go to actually integrated project delivery, where there is an engagement from every parties in the project successful. And I find that model quite interesting, even
Yeah.
more than design, because design and build is only for construction. But I've seen there's been some test examples, and we start to see them in Canada and some other places where actually designers, contractors, owners, everybody's invested as as if they were, as if they were part of the project revenue. So it's a little bit like share the pain, but share the gains also. You share the risks and you share the gains. And it's much more interesting because it's no longer people talking about what is good for their particular discipline. You start to see people really focus on what is good for the project at the long run of it.
That's really interesting. Like I think like there has been a lot of talk, of course, about this whole life cycle of building or road or such. But as you mentioned the examples, I'm really curious what kind of results or experiences they have had with those tests.
I've never been in one. From everything that I've read, they work very, very, very well. And it's related to this idea of lean design, lean construction, agile, digital thinking, and then integrating that with lifecycle operations. So it's digital twins help you on that. If you are familiar with UK program, soft landings is a little bit related to that, is the idea that you don't only design, you need to understand what happens with the asset after it's actually built, because they were observing that you were designing something to perform very well, but then actually for some reason it was not getting the results that you were expecting. So let's make sure that the designers are stay in the project and access it during the operation, so that you can actually understand what went well or what is not going so well on the process, so that you learn from the process from the next ones.
Yeah, definitely. And like I have been attending a lot of those different like startup conferences and those events where, well, small startups are selling their products or looking. And I think it's really interesting and fascinating to see like how advanced the IoT technology and this smart building thinking has really pushed. And I think that is something that will change how we design or build in the future to really, as you said, get the operation included in this whole cycle.
Agreed. one of the things that it's almost like a funny, sad story, but it has happened to me several times. Is like it's not unusual that because the waterfall process that traditionally forms our industry kind of force things to work on silos. So you have like design budget, then you have construction budget, then you have operational budget. And it has happened to me several times that even when we are trying to push for better solutions for operation, you can even get to a point where you can convince or you can get your project managers to agree with you, and they say, actually, that makes a lot of sense because in the long run, it will save us this amount of money. Unfortunately, to achieve that, I need to spend more money now. And this more money that I need to spend, I don't have it because it's in another person's budget. It's in the operating budget that I don't control. So yes, I will save a lot of money, but I cannot do it in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. Just out of curiosity, as we talked a lot of different, well, quite visionary ideas. Like now, when you look back in your work history, what kind of like big changes have you seen? Like what how to say, what hasn't flourished yet that is really big and coming as we talk about smart buildings and BIM and
What has not worked or what changes I have
yeah,
seen?
like what do you see that is coming from the industry? Like what kind of big changes do you think
Oh, this
we
will
will
not buy
have?
me a lot of this will not buy me a lot of friends among my colleagues architects. But I think one of the things that is going, honestly, I believe that with the technology uh, developments that we are facing, with robotics, with um, paramedical design, automation, we are on a verge of a change of paradigm. So we might be facing a new paradigm in terms of the AEC in construction. One paradigm where architects will be, or designers, when I say not only architects, but all the designers will become much more a mix between a computational geek and the funky designer that they used to be, right? It's a mix of both of them. And it's a new industry where people will play new roles. So not so much like traditionally, you design the building, right? As we move forward and we start to move towards integration with computational design, I believe that we'll start to assist one thing that I like to call human computers co-authorship. So you will not be designing the building itself, you'll be designing the system that designs the building. That's the logic of parametrical and computational design. You actually design a system that allows you to put the queries, and then that system will provide you the final design. You still control it, of course, but it's just a different process. And I think that's going to be a big change in the future, because sometimes we humans are very passionate about things, and not always, I would say even better, is like passion tends to drive us to achieve amazing things, but it's also sometimes blind us, right? We probably, all of us have passed to that phase where we love this. And then after some years, you say, how could we love that? It's like the 80s and their fashion style. And then you say, you look now back and say, that was really ugly, but it was super hot when I was young and I was a kid and I was using it, right? And there is this logic that computers can help us on that. It's like when you go to metrics and then you analyze performance with a computer for him is just performing computation. So it's not saying, I really want this to look good. There's not that. It's not biased. He just does it. Of course, any computer, the quality of the answer is only as good as the quality of the data and the quality of the question that you get into it, right? But I honestly believe that we will start to assist to a much more human and machines integration, more collaborative approach. And I really hope that that will lead us to a much more sustained industry where everything is going to be much more. I usually talk about this idea of changing the AEC industry from construction to assembly. So off-site manufacturing, site assembly,
Yeah.
because that allows you for much more efficiency and less waste.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something like, even though at least when speaking with colleagues and other people in industry, it seems that it's still quite far away and a bit futuristic to have these systems to do part of the designer's work or part of my BIM coordinator work. But I think it's something that is really like it's already possible today. Even like
It's
in
already, yeah, you're
yeah,
right. It's already there. It's
even like
happening.
yeah, even like my own work, like I was so frustrated with the designs that I got from civil engineering and the like manual labor of making those BIM models for machine guidance systems. So that's why we have been also starting to crack down that, hey, if we just remove all this fluff away and take only the like really important pieces that we need, we can make the same model and we don't need to really rely on what happens before us. Like we can do a little bit of manual cleaning and then just put it to machine and tada, we have models that can be put immediately to the machines and they work flawlessly.
I totally agree with you. This idea that the technology is working against us, I find it very hard to buy into it because I think there's no good or bad. It's the way that you use it, right? And yes, the other day was not the other day. It was just some months ago, before the COVID. I was in. I attended a conference, um, and someone was talking about digitalization and why people are afraid of digitalization. And they were talking in any revolution along the history of mankind, there's always the good and the bad. And people are saying that digitalization will lead to less jobs. And then the presenter actually pulled up a very nice cartoon that it was about the invention of the wheel, right? So before the wheel, people were just being carried, like the Romans used in the latest
Yeah,
carrying people. So you will need like four, four persons to actually uh, get one lettuce and get the guy one person to go. We'll need like four to carry them on all of these things because there's no wheels, right? You are just carrying them on your arms. And so you had that cartoon, and then you had another cartoon on the bottom that it was just one guy with four guys inside a car, and he was pulling the car. So everybody could go on a car because it was just easy, right? And the joke was that the guys that were actually pulling the traditional Roman transportation were just saying, well, we will all be out of jobs. This is going to kill the industry. But we know that the invention of wheel was something fundamental to move the society forward, right? So
yeah,
yes, there is a risk in one side, but there is an opportunity in the other side. It has been like that forever. Whenever there is this big technological revolutions, yes, some people lose jobs, but you will find new jobs where you can operate, new ways of
exactly.
operating.
Exactly, and I think it's like at the current state of AEC industry is that everyone need to learn and adopt a lot of new different ways to do the same thing much more efficiently. And I think that's really interesting because a lot of people are, some are like panicking, but many people are like really like they don't see that, okay, this is new thing, let's just give it to some junior guy who can then learn it. I don't want to learn anything new. And I think that's something that, because it's changing each role in our like operations, it's really like fundamental. And I think it's like, was it an industrialization or invention of wheel? Like, even though people they need to just learn new things as well. Every day you are learning new things, so you just educate and you will have a place in the future. I think it's a bit
Yeah,
of fluff
agreed.
for people are scared that, okay, tomorrow I cannot do the same work I'm doing now if we uh, go forward with digitalization. I think it has never been. You always need to just find more better ways.
I think so. I agree with you. It's like it's part of the human nature to strive for better, right? We always like to try to achieve to do things better. It's just our nature. It's what makes us as people, right? Um, and it's that you want to do better is just normal for all of us, I think. And digitalization or industry or whatever it is going to be a challenge. And I totally understand, because look, imagine this. You are an experienced engineer, say, and you have over 20 years experience. So you are very, very good at what you do. Suddenly, they move you to another country that speaks a completely different language. For illustration purpose, let's say Japan, because I don't speak Japan. Probably the majority of the people don't speak Japanese. So let's say that you move to Japan and you need to do a project with a team that only speaks Japanese. You will struggle a lot. And you will feel frustrated because you say, look, I have 20 years of experience. Just explain me what you need me to do. I will do it. But you cannot even communicate because the other guys on the other side is saying, what is he saying to us? He seems upset, but I don't get what he wants. Why doesn't he work? Well, he's so good. Why can't he just do what we know that he's good. Why doesn't he do this stuff? And digitalization, for those that doesn't want to embrace it, is a little bit like that. You are lock yourself in a dying language. It's like in a couple of years, you will be the equivalent of Latin in languages. It's extremely eroded. It has a huge historical value because it informs a lot of other languages, and it has a symbolic value still in the present, but no one actually is using it. So if you want to be able to communicate with people, get into a language that people understand, right? So
Definitely.
learn English, learn Chinese, whatever, right? It's the same thing with digitalization. I think it's just a new language. And that's why it's so painful, because you don't want to get, after 10, 15, 20 years of experience, you need to relearn basics of your industry that are not even really your industry in that sense, because it's like BIM is computational design, is not really architectural in a way for me, right? It's something that we can use, but it's not really my job, because my job is actually to design buildings. But in order to be able to do it in a more efficient way and to help, or in a more sustainable way, I need to be using this tool, and this tool forced me to a big learning process. I get it's scary, but I don't think that there is a way to the future that does not include digitalization. Sometimes when I do presentations in my conferences, I used to start by saying, hey, can I have hands up for those of you that do BIM? And then a couple of people. These days better, I must say, it's much better. Like when I started 5 years ago, you will see like 1, 2 persons. These days is like you see a lot of it, so that's good. But then you actually ask those of you that actually have not done it, and you start to have much more people raising their hands. And they'll say, well, I have some bad news for you. People say that BIM is the future. I don't believe that. If anything, BIM is the present. But in reality, the way that I see BIM, traditional BIM is already on the past, because we are now facing virtual design and construction with parametrical design and computational design as a base, working for digital fabrication and digital delivery. And that's way beyond the just simple BIM as we started to approach it like 10 years ago. So I would say the future is bright, but if you don't want to get involved in digitalization, it will be a challenging one.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point.
But there's hope. And you need, I will not say the name because the person might listen to this, but she will know who she is. A couple of years ago, I think probably 4 to 5 years ago, it was the tipping point. I was interviewing people for a job position. We were looking for someone expert in ArchiCAD at the moment to work with us. And an interesting thing was, traditionally, we will ask people about, what do you know about BIM? Have you worked with BIM before and the BIM process? And people say, yes, I have experience. Yes, I have some experience. This was the normal answer. And that candidate actually gave me what I still find today the most amazing answer. Basically, the candidate told me, I can do whatever you guys want me, but please don't force me to go back to 2D drawings again. And then I said, oh man, there is hope in the world.
That's good.
So there is hope in the world. And this was 5 years ago, and now it's much better, to be honest. But it was like, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's really changing. And it is changing. And we have been seeing it a lot. Unfortunately, it has not been driven by the industry itself. I think what drove this change towards digitalization is a lot related to owners realizing that, why should I be paying you so much more money and wasting so much more money if I can do this in a much more efficient way? That doesn't make sense. It's like, imagine you have a design consultancy firm. I have one, and our friend C has another one, right? So I'm an architect, and I love the old ways. So I'm actually unsketching everything and doing everything with pens. And of course, it takes me 3 times more the time to do any change that you ask me to. And I need the double of the people because there's no automation, there's nothing, right? And you, on other end, are completely full digitalization on with full on automation on it. And suddenly I go to try to sell, both of us are trying to sell the service to the same client. And I go to him and I say, look, I'm going to ask you for, say, $100 for this service, because I'm using this process that is traditional and it's rich of history and content, but it takes me time because see the quality of the work that I'm doing. And then you come in and say, yeah, well, I'm achieving actually better performance quality and I demonstrated these metrics. And it only took me 5 days and only took me 2 persons to do it. So I only need you to pay me $50. But I will be insisting, but no, look, I'm doing the traditional scheme, the way of it. And at some point you realize, the owners will realize, why is the logic? Why should I be paying more to Fred than Jero, just because Fred is using an old process and is not actually using the latest processes? Why should I pay? Why should I suffer? Because he doesn't want to convert to new tools. And that's what happened. Is like, but it's not only in design, it's also to construction, because we knew that projects were being developed and then on-site problems were occurring and there was a lot of site variations due to some miscoordination. Now, again, an owner was saying, if there is a potential saving of 30% on construction costs related to avoiding reworks, why shouldn't I take it? So yeah, by all means, I work with you, Jero. As much I will have less problems during construction. It will cost me less. And actually, I can simulate everything before it happens. So even things that were unpredicted, they will become visible. So of course, I want to do that. And this is why I believe it was a lot through governments and a lot through owners starting to realize that there was a more efficient way of doing it, that the change came. Not so much pushed by the construction industry or the design consultants. They were there to support it, but because the decision making is actually on the owner's side, it's to the owners. Whenever owners came to you and say, I need this, you will go after it because you want to keep that job, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's a human thing, right? It's the nature of the beast. But in other ways, I'm like everybody else. So I started to get in touch with, at the time was Revit and Rhino in 2008 when I was in Hong Kong. Well, I had some training before, but not really on a project, right? So, and then in 2011, I actually needed to do, because at that time I was already on a senior associate position. So I had a team working with me. We were working with Revit. I was managing it. I didn't need to do it everything in 3D. The first time I needed to do it, I was like everybody screaming. And I still remember went to my director at the time and say, look, I need help from that person for 1 week. Otherwise, I'm going to pull off and I'm just going to do 2D. It's very very normal. It's like when you are struggling with time, when you're struggling with the timeline and everything is new for you and you just want to move things fast, your first reaction is you want to run away from it.
Yeah.
But when it's like paramedics, it's like, I can solve this problem. If I'm only solving this problem here, I can solve it probably much faster with a traditional 2D because I just move a line, that's it, done. But the problem is that all the problems that came after, because problems will occur always after, you will need to change, you'll need to review it, you will still cumulatively take all this time, every time something needs to be fixed. And if you went pragmatically, and it's already computational design driven from that time, yes, maybe it took you didn't solve it in 2 hours, it took you 1 day, but so 8 hours of work, but all the sequencing problems that you occur, you solve them very quickly because it's already the parametrically solved, it's already there. You're just adjusting the parameters to try to make it work. While if you are drafting by hand, each time you need to do it again, right?
Yeah, definitely. And like in Finland, we have this saying of "beam bam boom." It's like it's like €1 to fix error in design, €10 fix error in construction, and then €100 to like it's just saying like we should more put resources to the design and make it to support the construction and operations so much more efficiently. How to say, like much more greater. And I think it's like how to say, maybe 80% of projects at the moment where I'm doing, there's always like the designer is on demand. So if we have problems, we just call, hey, can you come and look with us these things? And that's a really good way to really push more effort to the, how to say, or push more money to design that they support the next stages of process.
I honestly think that, look, we know that the construction period during a development is probably where an owner needs to spend more money. We all agree that because you are transforming something that only exists on the digital world, on paper, to a building. So you are investing a lot of work, a lot of money there. You are spending a lot of money. But there's also a huge potential to save money in that process.
Yeah.
But for that, you need to spend money before during you start to build. If you build virtually, so that's why we talk about virtual design and construction. So if you actually, instead of designing buildings, you digitally, virtually constructing them, so integrating all the teams, before you actually go to site, you already experimented all the problems that you can have on site. You went through them, you thought about it, and the risks that you carry to site are much less. But to do that, your team needs to be bigger. You need to stay more time in the project. Agree. That's more money. Yes. But the cost of design versus the cost of construction, as you say, is bim bam boom, is $1, $10, $100. So if you could actually realize that it's only to your benefit to spend more upfront so that the construction process could be much more effective, we are all to gain. I remember Álvaro Siza, that is a Portuguese architect, is very well known. And many years ago, I saw an interview with him where he was mentioning that sometimes you spend 6 months designing a building, and then it takes you 6 years to build it. And it almost made more sense to do the opposite. That is, spend 6 years thinking about what you want to do it, and then do it in 6 months. And many years later, I really relate to that idea that if you spend enough time thinking about the process and before you actually going into construction, when you construct, everything is going to be streamlined and much more efficient. And that is huge in terms of the benefits that you have for construction, because during a construction site, you have a team, 200 people, 300 people, depending on the size of the project. On the design side, you might have 20, 40 people, depends on the size of it. It's 100 people, same for the same project, right? So keeping a huge construction team on site for years and years and years and years is going to be much more expensive than actually have a design team on it trying to optimize the process. Not only that, everything that you can realize that you can do offsite is going to be much more efficient, and it will lead to less wastage on site. So you're going to assemble it. You don't need to actually spend so much time waiting for things to happen and correct them on site.
Yeah, and you have really valuable point on there. Like, I mean, that
I'm not saying
moment.
that you need to take 6 years on designing, right? I was just quoting one, but I think that there is definitely a benefit to don't rush to construction, rush to quality. And good design and good construction planning will help you through a quick construction process. And these three together will get you a better quality product. That's my view on it. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Like, I mean, that thing, especially like when we start the project with the municipality, we always like how to say, the first 1 month or 2 months, it's almost like from hand to mouth to trying to get the models and all the things done so we can do the quantity estimations, we can do the planning, we can visualize, we can check that there's no conflicts, and there's like a lot of hassle in the start. But then if we would get those models that have been checked and that they are made well, we can, even before we start the construction, make the really good plans how we gonna operate, and in the end it would result the lower bid amount that we give for our client, because again, if we can do it faster, we will then offer it. The margins are quite, or the competition is quite tough.
I agree with you. It's a question that traditionally you want to be. It's an interesting one, because when you look at the traditional profile of the investment, the later you can spend money, you are reducing your risk, theoretically, right? So say, if I can pay for something in 1 year, better not to pay now, because I still keep this money and I can generate other things with this money, and then in 1 year, I will make that investment. But the funny thing is that when you go to digitalization, it works the other way around. you need to front end more than back end.
Yeah,
And I think
definitely.
that's why I talk a lot in my talks, saying that this, for us to be able to really benefit from digitalization to its full potential, we need to look to the traditional structure of contracts in the industry. The traditional structure of contracts in the industry is not necessarily designed to cater for the best performance in a digital delivery process. It's a big word of mouth what I'm saying, but basically, if try to translate it, is sometimes the process that we have been, all of us adopt in the industry, say you have concept, you have schematic design, then you have detailed design or design development, detailed design, tender documents, call for tender, tender review period, submission of proposals, award, then construction, then you actually delivering the project, and then you are operating it, right? All of this waterfall approach is not necessarily the best thing that you can do in a digital environment. You mentioned it already. It's like design and build is probably more efficient as a system. But I believe you can even go beyond that and try to find better ways for us to all to collaborate in a process, so that the main goal is the quality, the final quality of the process, and where everybody works collaborative. It's a bit challenge, especially on the like Anglo-Saxonic environments where common law and Anglo-Saxonic law are slightly different, right? For me, I'm from Southern Europe, so I'm very familiar with continental law, but I've worked abroad for more than 12 years, so I'm very familiar with the Anglo-Saxonic law, so the King's Law. So in that sense, I can see the benefits from both of them. But I always felt that this constraint that you see in America, for instance, a lot of times people talk, but as that stand on a court of law, as that actually went through the court of law, and you were able to sustain your positions, sometimes that worked against the implementation of new models because they have not been tested. And in an environment that is very litigious, as is, for instance, in the US, where you have a lot of people suing a lot of people, you don't want to run the risk of, by trying a new model of contract, suddenly you end up with a nightmare in a court, right?
Yeah.
It's a challenge. I understand that. But I do believe that it could be, let's imagine this, I don't know, like even a design stage, you could say, well, we have concept. Why do we need to follow it schematic? Maybe we follow it parameterization. It's a new completed stage that might be something different. And then you have another stage that you can do when you do early early contractor engagement, where you actually, from a very early stage on the project, you involve contractors to listen to their opinions. I remember in a project that I worked, we were developing a very complex geometry. At one point, we were debating with the client, how do we deliver this to the industry? And we were saying, look, we want to deliver this using our model. Because if you try to do this by paper, you can do it, but it's going to be like amount of drawings like this. And it might not be so useful for the guy that is on the other side, because he needs to rebuild everything in the 3D model again. So we end up going to the market and consulting contractors that had been pre-selected to have the quality or even the experience to deal with such complex geometries. And when they were explained what you needed to do, and do you want it to do in 2D or do you want it to do in 3D, and they just say, just forget that. We want the model. Don't even bother. And then the problem became, how do we sign a digital thing? Then this was like many years ago, so there was not all of these things that we have now in terms of blockchains, and that didn't even exist. It is like, how do you sign on.
Yeah, you cannot rubber stamp it on it.
You cannot do your signature there. And it was very interesting, but where we were brainstorming to overcome it with the lawyers and everything, at one point, one of the options in the table was saying, look, any digital model is a series of zeros and ones, right? Because it's binary code by definition. So we could always translate that, all of that, to binary code, and you sign on the papers on the binary code. Luckily, we didn't do it that way. We find a much more efficient way of doing it, but sometimes the legal framework can become a hurdle. I say these days is much better, and for people that are now doing digital delivery, you will see that it's much, much, much easier. And we even have an ISO for BIM and all of these things, so it's becoming familiar. But even so, I think that we could further benefit for really holistically looking at the process and redesigning the process of the design itself, the design and construction processes. As I said, anything that you can do to reduce construction site time. I'm not saying reducing construction time, because you still have construction time, but you probably have much more prepared work before you go on to site, probably will result in a much more effective process that will have much less impact to environment. And then, for me, getting back to the beginning of the conversation where I was saying that as an architect, as also with a degree in environmental planning, sometimes I struggle to balance both of them. I will be in a much more comfortable position, because suddenly construction is not necessarily the enemy of nature and environment.
Yeah, definitely, and it's really interesting. Like I think on my work history, I have had one project where the models are the how to say, they are the real designs, and the 2D drawings are additional. But mostly with the municipalities or government organization, it's usually the 2D models are the what we should follow, and 3D is something that can help you. And then again, when we get those, we are like, okay, these two doesn't match, so we throw away models and we start modeling again. And it was really interesting. Like there was in Finland famous subway project in Helsinki, our capital. It was I don't know how many millions, or I think it was something. It was anyways crazy amount. And then it was really funny graph of, there was like cost of design and cost of construction, and then cost of operation. And then there's the chart of we saved 1% of design, construction at 23% of extra budget, and then the operational, they already, I think it's 200% of what they estimated. And it's like just crazy. Like, okay, we saved here, and
that's what I was telling you before. This is the sad reality of siloed work, because when it's not all the process holistically integrated, you have real problems of saying, look, it really, give me $1 more here, because you can save $10 in 1 year time. But the problem is, and I understand that also, is like, if you don't have that $10, if you don't have that $1 today, you will need to pay the extra $10 in the future. And I do realize that. But when you have it, and it's just a question of, it's on my right pocket, but I cannot move it to my left pocket, it's kind of, that's a shame, right? That's really, really, really a shame. But as you're saying, it's getting better. And probably you will not listen. When I started this 26 years ago, you didn't have so many people talking about operations and life cycle. Now it's much more common. And I think it's because of all of this digital fabrication and digital twins, and as you were saying, IoT. The fact that, for instance, in the last 10 years, the price of sensors have dropped dramatically. It made it very cheap to have a lot of them, because in the old, like 10 years ago, you were going to buy a sensor, it will be extremely expensive, right? These days they are cheap, so you can have them. And that will really help to monitor performance. And it's the same thing that, and the funny story here, take it to a normal world that people can relate to it. 15 years ago, no fridge will have a performance energy tab on it, right? You know, the things that you now have when you buy a fridge, it tells you what is the energy class of the fridge, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Suddenly, everybody starts to talk about energy class of fridge. And before, no one will even care about they'll say capacity, they will say what is the design, what is the materials, and what is the brand. And that was it. And now you have this new factor that is really driving people to smart choices. And I guess this is what digitalization can do for the AC world and construction industry. The AC industry, by leveraging digitalization, can now have really measurements of efficiency classes and energy classes. And when this starts to be present, you look at it. For instance, in my home country here in Portugal, a couple of years ago, we started to make mandatory when you buy a house to have the equivalent of the fridge, but for the houses. So you have a class performance energy for the houses. So people now start to say, hey, hang on. Yeah, this house is cheaper than that one, but it's only class D. The other one is class A. So the difference on price is not that high that will justify my life cycle costs.
That's really cool. That's really inventive. We need that kind of features on construction of AEC as well.
And it generated new jobs because you need someone that goes and assess and certifies your current flat for energy performance, right?
Yeah.
It has not been. So in that sense, digitalization helped, right? Again, an example. Maybe digitalization makes some types of work redundant, but in the other hand, it opens new opportunities for sure.
I'm really curious to hear your war stories of from your projects. Like, what kind of what has been for you the biggest challenges that you have faced in your projects or in your work in AEC industry?
I think, to be honest, it's like my biggest challenge, and this is probably not the answer that you want to hear, so I'm going to give you that and then give you something that you like together. But I'd say that I always said that the biggest challenge on the being as an architect, the biggest challenge is actually dealing with people. But it's also the most passionate thing about it. So, and this is nothing to do with digitalization, but it's the fact that you are interfacing with different people. And the fact that I have worked in South Europe, I've worked in Asia, and I work in Southeast Asia, and I work in Australia, made me really realize how different people are. And sometimes what works in one place does not necessarily work in another place. What is completely okay for someone might be completely inappropriate for another one. So this forces you to have a completely new perspective on understanding how you can get the best from people in that sense. So I really love this idea of being able to position myself to interact with my teams to get the most out of them. And I'm going to be honest, I have not always successfully achieved this. And sometimes I've crashed and burned. This it's like majority of the times, the large majority of the times, no. But we all have times where things didn't work out quite the way that we wanted. And that's, I think, actually made us better because if you are able to cope with, I remember once, long time ago, this was back into probably 90 or 92, no? Yeah. No, it was after that, but I was still a young architect and I was back in Macau and I was having supporting a site construction in China. So every week I was traveling to the other side of the border to China. And at that time, China was still pretty neat, I would say. it was not so normal to have so much people as it was today. Okay, this was around 2005, 2007, so some years ago. And I remember going, and I was still relatively young. I was going to construction sites, and people were asking me, I don't know, it doesn't matter when it was, but it was some time ago. And one of the engineers asked me, but you are so young, are you not afraid of making mistakes? And I said, why should I be afraid of making mistakes? Later on, I understood what he wanted to say, right? But I said, well, if I'm afraid of making a mistake, I'm not going to do anything because I will be blocked. I cannot make any decision because there is always a risk that the incorrect one. So, and this informs everything. Is like, so being able to deal with success in the same way that you are able to deal with failure is equally important. And it's funny, I have a daughter, and we see a lot, especially when you have too much positive environment. Sometimes myself and my wife even laugh about it because we see like a kid is trying to do something and their parents going, ah, amazing. It's just like whatever, very simple thing. Yes, you should be supported, but it's like, don't make it like it's the best thing in the world, everything. Because then when actually the best thing in the world occur, you cannot do it that is better already. And sometimes it happens with younger generations is that you get to the reality that, oops, why I'm not being so much appreciated as I wanted to. Like you go to kindergarten and you get something right and you get a star. In real world, you don't always get a star, right? you just do your job, and that's it. So, as I was saying, the most challenging thing is working with people. The most amazing part of the job is working with people, definitely. Is there any other aspects of it that could be interesting? I'm really passionate about my work, and there's a lot of histories that we can go around and tell it. But whenever you are really able to build a rapport with the people that you are working with, and the idea that you are designing, you design something, and then a couple of years later, you see someone enjoying that space, and you feel that you have contributed for that person better life in that sense, enjoying life. That's very rewarding in that sense.
Definitely, and it's really interesting what you said about people. Like how to say, for me as well. Like for my job, I call myself in the construction site that I'm the BIM sales guy. So it's all about like to really, as you said, some people learn differently, or the ways, or the workarounds, or work methods, or processes, or finding the ways how he finds the value and benefit out of things. And I think it's like any change. It's I think it's always the biggest challenge, but also it's the biggest reward as well. And I think
Agree.
it's just amazing to see like. For example, maybe half a year ago, I trained one team who hasn't even heard of BIM about how we should build with BIM. It was like really, I was there maybe first 1 month. I was there just sparring and trying to get them use the tools and taking the value. And now every time when I visit it, it's just like amazing to see that people are like they are more experts than me with the tools. And then when I'm asking like, how you do this? Oh no, you just click here and then you start select the model and then you can go and take a look. And I think it's crazy to like it's amazing reward to get something like this.
I'm imagining it's the same thing as the story I was telling you before. Suddenly you have someone on the other side saying, I can do everything except don't put me doing 2D, right? And it's really rewarding when you're trying for years to push for a process that majority of the people is just running away from them because they are afraid. So yes, it is. I can relate to that.
I'm also really interested to dig a little bit deeper of that you had experience on as a senior project leader. What would you say, or what would you recommend the skill set to really have necessary to succeed in such position as that?
Mm, it's an interesting one. I think there are several ways that you can actually get to a more senior position. And I think that traditionally, probably, especially in architecture, those that were extremely creative and capable in terms of design will exceed to the highest positions naturally as they started to do their work. It will take them some time, but we will get to there. I think it's changing now because as we are evolving to a collaborative environment, it's not going so much to be about the capacity of the one, it will be about the capacity of extracting the most of the group. So those that are able to engage with people, manage processes, being organized, anticipate problems and find solutions, or find strategies to avoid problems and to overcome problems and finding solutions, and get the other ones that are working with you to actually do it. This is probably much more, it's going to have more value now than it had probably 20 years ago, because 20 years ago it will be all about your design capacity.
Yeah,
You can have now an amazing team leader that, let's imagine this for as an illustration. You have an office or a studio where you have three amazing designers, but they are always conflicting with each other because they are very passionate and each one of them wants to be the lead designer. So for the office, you are always struggling with these three, correct? So it's a disruptive environment. You can, someone that is not even an amazing designer, if he can find a way for these three to collaborate, he will be the natural leader for that office because he will be the one that is able to generate the most from that group. So that's the example I was saying, is like, as in the old times, these three will fight against each other to see which one was the most valuable and became the leader, while probably in today's world, the skill sets that you'll need is the person that is able to get the most of these three to work to collaborative, and that will be the guy that actually became the leader. And he doesn't even need to be a designer at all in that
yeah,
sense.
yeah. I think it really changes the landscape. That it's
Yes.
those are the technical experts, and then there's the communication or management side that very different from each other.
And this understanding that the process is now collaborative changed. So you went from a star system where you have one person that is the star and everything trickles down from that creative person that leads everything, that EDLA that has the vision and everybody then trickles down to a group of equally important doing different functions of people that work in tight collaboration, very tight work together to achieve more. And this is the very old story of the wood stick against the four wood sticks. If you have only one wood stick, it's much easier to break than when you have four wood sticks working together, right? And it's the same thing as teams. When the teams work collaboratively well, you will achieve much more because you achieve synergies. I can say A, you will understand A plus B, and someone will get that C that is even better than my A or your B. And it's that ability to congregate everybody that I think is becoming fundamental. Sometimes I'm asked, what is the tool that you need to know to, if should I learn Revit? Should I learn ArchiCAD? Should I learn um, EcoSim. Should I learn AutoCAD? And I say, learn to be good at what is your business. These are just digital tools. It's like speaking Spanish, speaking in English, speaking. Yes, if you speak English, you probably can work abroad more opportunities, right? If you, for instance, are in South America, maybe it makes sense that you speak Spanish because a lot of South America speak Spanish, right? If you are in Northern Asia, you want to speak Mandarin. And tools are like that. They facilitate your communication. So, but I can be super expert in BIM, but if I don't understand anything about construction, probably, or design, probably I will never be on a very top role on that. I can be on a top role of BIM, but BIM is not AEC, right? It's a process, not the whole thing.
That's really a really good way to visualize it. Like that's really good example.
Thank you. Well done.
Just a little bit touch upon when you said that you have worked in many different continents. What kind of different challenges and uh, ways to do did you find there? Like, was it much different when you changed the continent?
I was a little, when I first changed continents, right, I was lucky because I wound up going to Macau. That is, at the time it was in China. So this was before the Andover, that is 1997 in Hong Kong, so something like that. So I was there, and although it was different, it was still familiar because it was a Portuguese administrative region. So we still had familiarity with our culture there. But it also exposed me to the Asian way of doing it. It's the same. I guess it will be the same for someone coming from England going to Hong Kong while Hong Kong was still under a UK administration, right? And one of the interesting things I'll say is that it was really interesting because as an architect coming from South Europe, we have very fixed ideas about the role of architecture and what is important, and we are very passionate about it. And then I went to Asia and I started to talk with people, and their references were completely different from mine. It was like, oh, but you know this guy, and they'll say, who is that person? I never heard about it. But it's an amazing architect, and don't know it. And they will mention their owns, and they'll say, I am not so familiar with that one. I know this one and this one. And this idea that architecture is the same throughout is not real. It's completely different. And I can tell you that Asia is more commercially much more. It's very funny. It's like the paces are completely different when we work. I remember when I was in Asia, sometimes we were discussing about hiring someone from Europe. And the problem will never be, does he has the competence or the skills? Will be, is he able to cope with the change on pace? The pace, the rhythm of work is much different. And I would say that because I've worked in Asia, in Middle East and Europe, probably you work very, very fast in Asia, you work fast in Middle East, and the slowest is in Europe in that sense, in terms of the process itself. But it doesn't mean that is necessarily because of the people doing the process, but sometimes it's just that the administrative process is also much slower in some cases. Like if you are requested to do an environmental study that takes 2 years to run, you cannot do a process as fast on another place where you don't even have an environmental assessment. You just build it, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it is because of it, but I think pace is very different in that sense. And I'm not saying that ones are right and the other ones are wrong. It's just different. The pace is different. So if you're talking about a building in Europe, a normal, in any city that we go, you will have buildings that have been there for 100 years, 200 years, some of them. You go to a new city in Asia that is just flourishing, and after 30 years, you might demolish a building because it's no longer viable, economic, and you're doing another one, right? So even the life cycle is different. And you need to be able to cope with this to understand that priorities might be different in some cases. It's like speed might then become quite influential and permanent where you are trying to achieve. That is something that usually you might not consider so much when you are in Europe because you're working different rhythms. Another thing is actually the level of industrialization of the construction industry itself and the cost of workmanship. If you are, for instance, in some South Asian countries, workmanship, labor work might not be too expensive. So you might lead you to a couple of set of solutions that are less technological and more labor intensive. Then that informs also the process where you design for it. But for instance, when I was in Australia, the cost of labor, iron labors on site was very, very high. So there is a huge look forward to try to get everything prefabricated in terms of construction, in terms of structural design.
Wow.
So you design differently because you want to use a beam that is already prefabricated so that you don't have a guy on site trying to iron and to bend the rebars to do it because that's too expensive. And it's just the nature of the market because labor is more costly in Australia than it's, for instance, for probably, I don't know, Philippines or Myanmar. So you end up doing different design solutions.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
definitely.
what I like is like the fact that there's no one size fit all. This idea that everything is the same is wrong. So that's why I don't like so much star designers that go and take their design and replicate their design throughout where they go. Because I do believe that in the same way that vernacular architecture always responded very well to regional context, because traditionally you were responding using the materials that you had there, right? So years of experience using materials that were available led to solutions that were naturally sustainable because that's what you had. When you start to import glass towers throughout the world, regardless of the climate, you might find yourself in a position where one, glass might be not very, very effective in terms of isolating you from extremely cold, like say in Finland, I will imagine, right? Or Norway or in the Arctic pole. If you are doing an office building in the Arctic, you're not going to do it all in glass probably because there's no sun and it's going to be too cold. You need to do a very thermal effective building envelope. But you have also the opposite. That is to say, you go to Saudi Arabia or to a tropical country that has, I don't know, like how many hours of sunlight every day, and you design everything in glass also without any shading is also not efficient. So understanding context is important if you want to do sustainable design.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting what you said about different place and culture and pacing. It was really interesting. Like I think 1 year ago, there came Chinese representatives to really just to see the construction in Finland, and they visited a couple of the big projects and then one small, and then they asked that, yeah, you are doing really fast construction well, progress, but where are all the guys? There's only like couple people we see on the project.
Yeah.
And it was like, well,
That's good for us. That's the thing. It's like, and I guess as we enter this globalized world, moving from one part to the other, we should be particularly careful to pay attention to context, right? It's an interesting thing because if you look at the auto industry, in the beginning of the auto industry, there were workshops throughout the world, and everybody was trying to do their own car differently. Like you would have 100 different workshops in Italy, and everybody was building their cars. As it evolved, you went and reduced, and you now have only a couple of real big brands in the world that are developing cars, because the process was very optimized. But they were able to develop a product that is able to perform both in the Sahara Desert or in the Arctic. A car will just work, right? If we are able to do buildings that are equally efficient in any one of them, then you can talk about exporting models from one side to the other. Until we achieve that point, I believe that we still need to take in consideration local context. For instance, if you force everything to be on aircon, then you can design aircon and heating, central heating. Then you can design a building in a very similar way in, say, the Sahara Desert or in on the South Pole. Very similar, because at the end of the day, it's the MEP that is going to deal with all of that. You just need to do a good, appropriate isolation skin, building envelope, and that will deal with it. But if you want to go on a more passive design that is sustainable by nature, then if you are in a very hot climate, you probably will have tall ceilings so that naturally the heat will rise up and will be cooler when you are on the lower levels, right? That's an historical thing that you have always done. In the same way, if you are on a place that they are like in the Sahara Desert, you probably will have constructions there traditionally have very small windows because they want to protect themselves from sun. And that's why it's very complicated then when you start to translate all of these things. And sometimes I used to joke with some of my friends. We're looking at the glass tower on a tropical country for office building. And you're saying, okay, so what is the logic for this? Because for definitely is not the most efficient way of doing a building here, because you're going to spend a lot of money in terms of life cycle. But then economics comes on and people want to see. So you don't want to work on a room with 4 walls, you want to see out. And because you want to see, you can sell the views. It really kind of puts everything the other way around, because the ability to sell becomes more important than the performance of the building itself. So we, as consumers, need to be more aware of the importance of our decisions when you buy things, because they influence the way that we design them. Again, is the example of the fridge. 20 years ago, no one will care about the energy class of a fridge because you didn't even know it existed. But if you start to actually make people aware that some types of buildings might not be so efficient, when you actually start to make a decision where you as an owner of a business want to be in a building, you will say, well, I understand that, but I want to be on that building because it associates with what I believe to be a better approach also. And you select the other building, not only based because you have better views, but because it has good views, but it has also good performance, and it really reflects the principles that you believe also in it. It's a process of change.
The InfraPioneer Podcast, Infrastructure Construction, from the perspective of BIM specialists and on-site engineers.